Let's go ahead and move ahead with the next section, which the Cookie Marenco is here now. I've already introduced you. Paul just came up, started to answer a question. So why don't we let you talk about, I've already explained that I believe all of us up here, without question, are going to agree the tape is the best method, best media. From there, generally speaking, we have two popular formats. One is DSD, which we're going to let Cookie discuss. Normally, I would ask somebody from reference, so I'll probably go over to you for PCM, since you're the closest thing to reference we have. Okay. Well, Cookie, why don't you go ahead and talk about a little bit about DSD, what it is, and please go into your discussions that you had at the seminars before about provenance and so forth, keeping track of what's real and what's not real.
How many of you have listened to DSD files? Oh, nice.
Wow.
Are you downloading? Okay. Are you listening to DSD through your SACD player? Okay, so that's the majority. Would you consider listening to a DSD file if you had access to more music? Would you consider listening to DSD file if it started its life as a PCM recording? I don't see any hands. Okay. Well, it's one of the challenges that we face. I like to call the era of PCM recording the dark ages. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are fans of PCM. I've worked in the PCM world quite a bit. I went back to analog tape. So at our label, we record analog tape. We mix down to DSD. We have PCM available for conversion and also for outside files that come in. And I've had a commercial recording facility for 25 years. So we're used to getting all kinds of files. And the unfortunate part is now that we're more committed to you, the end user who's listening, we want to make sure that what we deliver it's accurately described. What I'm not a fan of is having you pay more money for a DSD file that originally started life as 9624. This is an easy thing to happen. In fact, a lot of SACDs have even come from 44.1. Are you aware of this? Okay, so you know the problems and challenges. Well, when you go to a record label and you're trying to find the source recordings, it's very difficult. I worked at Windham Hill. 20 years later, I still have some of their masters at my studio. I still have masters from Island Records that was bought and sold so many times. Nobody knows who has those masters. In fact, I called them trying to give them back the masters. So it's a really interesting, complicated question about disclosure of what these files really are that you're getting. At this time, with DSD delivery being so new, it's our choice to deliver only DSD files that we know came from DSD native recording, the source recording, or from analog, which I like. I actually prefer analog recording to DSD, and have been mixed down to DSD or transferred half-inch over to DSD. I'm not even a fan personally of taking DSD and going to half-inch and then cutting a vinyl. That's just not my style. I would rather, if I'm going to sell a vinyl recording, I'd rather have it come from the half-inch, mixed to the half-inch, not going to any digital stage in the middle. But what you're buying in vinyl, in a lot of vinyl cases, is also you're buying either a 9624 file or a 44.1 file that's maybe been converted to half-inch or DSD and then cut on the lathe. I'm not sure if a lot of you are aware of what you're buying. I'm hoping in the next few years there's actually a movement that starts where we'll have some place where at least there's disclosure. So you'll have the opportunity to know what was the source recording. I've seen very famous symphonies put on the back of their SACDs, the DSD logo. Not just the SACD logo, but the DSD logo, which in my mind tells me that that was recorded to DSD. And then I'll talk to the engineer who's been a friend of mine for 30 years, and he'll say, oh, no, I record everything to 9624. And I'll say, well, are you aware that somebody is putting DSD on the back of the SACDs? And they'll say, really? I'm kind of amazed at this, but this is what's been going on in the recording world. Once it gets to the engineers, who are pretty good at keeping track, and the producers, and then it goes off to mastering, things start to get hazy. Typically in a recording contract, the record label takes over at that point. Now, more and more over the last 20 years, artists and producers were more involved in the mastering. But literally, once it leaves the mastering house, we don't know what's happening. Do you know a band called Third Eye Blind? I remember having a conversation with their lead singer, and I said, he's a fantastic producer. He loves analog tape, went out and bought another 2-inch machine, loves what we're doing with DSD. And I said, have you ever listened to your MP3s? And he said, no. I said, well, you should. Because the producer doesn't really get any choices of even how the MP3s are made or the FLACs. It's just out of control. At Blue Coast, what we've done is we've taken the control back. We've built the delivery system. We deliver directly from our DSD files. We create the files. We're starting to expand our catalog because we can't possibly create all the music. But in expanding the catalog, it's been difficult. Talking to labels, talking to symphonies. Nobody knows what their original source recordings are. And a lot of them will say, just take it off the CD, the SACD, just rip it off. I say, no, we want the masters. And they'll say, oh, well, you're in trouble. So anyway, that's what we're facing now, and it's the reason why I feel that the DSD content is going to be more difficult to expand on. It's almost more difficult to go back and try to find the archives of how all this started than just kind of, let's start fresh. Let's teach the next generation how to record well, which is a lost art form in itself. But teach them how to record either to analog or to DSD.
Could you explain to those that might not know what DSD means?
DSD stands for Direct Stream Digital. It was an archiving format developed by Sony in the early 90s for the purpose of archiving their analog tapes. At that point, they didn't really see a need necessarily for releasing this to the public. And then they came up with SACD at a time when broadband didn't really exist in the late 90s and early 2000s. So at that time, it made sense. I mean, there were opportunities to release good PCM recordings on SACD. So what they would do is transfer those PCM recordings to DSD. So do you know what PCM means? Yep. Pulse code modulation. It's a kind of digital recording. DSD is a different kind of digital recording. I like to say that DSD is as different to PCM as vinyl was to cassette. It's a little easier to see the difference between vinyl and cassette because they physically look different. With DSD, what looks different is the inside of the computers. We're learning every day. We learn from our customers who write in every day, trying to set up their systems, working with the manufacturers. We learned something new today that I'm not even going to get into with you guys. But we've found some systems that do work, and this is really early development stage, so enter at your own risk and be part of the movement that goes forward with us, because eventually DSD potential is that a 1-bit recording, and it's 1 bit with 2.8 million parts per second, is, say, the equivalent of a 192 PCM file. One of the differences, aside from sonic qualities, I just tend to prefer DSD, but the size of the file. DSD is about half the size of a 192 file. So just for digital delivery, it's going to be faster through the internet. It's going to sound better. It's going to cost us and you less money to send, because when we're sending out free files when you download, these giant files cost us a lot of money to send out. So this, if we can send out a file that sounds what could be the equivalent of 192 at half the size, it's a benefit. Plus, we're looking at 5.6 within the next few years, and even upwards of that in DSD recording. So that means one big bit divided up 2.8 million parts per second. That means a dynamic range that doesn't drop bits when you get to lower dynamics. By dynamics, I mean loudness levels. As in PCM recording, as something gets dynamically softer, you tend to lose bits. That means you're going to tend to lose definition in the sound and high frequency, low frequency, it just gets kind of muddy and ugly. But in DSD, when you get lower, you're still at one big bit. It's just dividing it up.
You're looking at me. Caught me by surprise. Do you have anything to say on DSD?
Yeah. I think I got the wrapper microphone. I'm supposed to hold the back end of it up here. I've worked extensively in all 4 of the high-res formats, PCM, DSD, vinyl, and tape. And I've noticed that the people doing the best work are, they're particular about their formats, but it's because they're particular about everything. The format is important, but it's far from the most important thing. So before I even talk about differences among the formats, I have to really establish a baseline here that what makes a great recording has to do, well, first with musicians playing something worth listening to again, but then it has to do with great care in selecting the hall, the microphone positions, several thousand decisions that the producers and engineers will make. Their format of choice is one of those decisions, and it's an important one, but it's far from the most important. Other than that, no, I don't have anything to add about DSD.
Well, we're not in the format wars anyhow.
Yeah.
We've talked about that on the phone, Paul, and actually privately. I think that what I have found, well, first of all, any of these products in the high end that really truly represent the high end, somebody not just wanting to move boxes for profit, whatever's inside the boxes, the cartons or whatever, it comes with tender loving care. Tam Henderson started Reference Recordings, who I consider to have some of the finest PCM recordings for spatial and for spatial qualities, imaging, dimension. On the other hand, I have Cookie Marenco, who I consider is able to capture timbre, correct tonality on her recordings. She's at the top of the class. If somebody's head and shoulders with her, that's fine. I'd like to meet them and have him here at the next recording session, okay? This, as I said earlier, this basically started with Northern California people, of which Cookie is one of them and Paul is one of them. And I chose these people because of the love and tender care they put into their recordings. There are differences in the recordings. My preferences I've just stated. Okay, I believe that the people working with DSD, such as Cookie and Michael Bishop, as an example, who was with Telarc for so many years and is now with 5/4 Productions, have captured the essence of timbre to a degree in most of their recordings that I'm bewildered by. I truly am. So when we're doing, excuse me, a product at MIT, as it comes down the pike, so to speak, it comes out of my computer, prototypes are made, tested, measured against the mathematical models, the linear models, optimization models. They're brought into a sound room. I have a sound room there that I particularly like. It's a small room, very little wall treatment, very few tube traps, small speakers. Right now I'm using Magico Q1s They're up off the floor, near field. Okay? I find that very useful. We use different gear at MIT. We've had Constellation in there recently. We did some work for them, Spectral, Pass, ARC. We always have ARC around, Carry, and probably some others I'm not forgetting. But the DSD recordings that I'm listening to by those people that I'm talking about are capturing timbre very, very, very accurately. I've known Tam since somewhere, I think, late 70s, early 80s, probably before I know it was before I met you. And I have a tremendous regard for the man. And his desire to go out and do recordings in large halls. How many microphones do they use in some of those recordings, Paul?
Up to around a dozen.
Yeah, a dozen? Okay.
But that would be 6 pairs.
Okay.
Because Keith doesn't use mono spot mics.
Yeah.
Or section mics. Everything he puts up is pairs.
All right. Good. Since about 1995, I've used the Rudder Requiem as one of my from reference recordings. John Rudder's Requiem for one of my discs for dimensionality. So I'll swap back and forth. You see what I'm getting at? We're back to what can the audiophile control, manipulate? Only 2 things, tonality and dimension. Cables have what we call an articulation response. Articulation is nothing more than how much energy the cable stores in its capacitive or inductive fields and releases in phase. By that I mean you can take volts times amps and you get VAR. Okay, volt amps reactive. Somebody didn't bring any water today, did they? Do you have any water back there, Chris? Or Kent? Thank you. Why don't you bring a couple of bottles if you can? I'm kind of drying up here. Yeah, the altitude too. So we're back to the opening statements. Hence, the people I've surrounded me with. Cables. We define the articulation response, which I was just saying is how much energy is stored and released, how fast is it released, and how fast or slowly does it decay. Think about that. If it decays too slow, it's going to cover up the next envelope of information coming through it. And now we have a term called causal or causality. It's no longer causal. We have a causality because there's information at the output that is not dependent upon information at the input at that instant. So thank you very, very kindly. Excuse me. So our articulation response helps define that. We actually use a 3-dimensional response. I've actually used as many as 5 dimensions. But the one that's the easiest to understand is the 2-dimensional one that we provide in our advertisements and in our tech papers and so forth. So dielectrics, they're very similar to rooms. If I energize this room with some sort of complex waveform, which means it has more than one component in it, or as ASC does, where they use impulses, a certain amount of that information is going to be stored in the structure, and it's going to have a Q, or the inverse of that's a dampening factor, and it is going to be it is going to lead through the structure by many, many hundreds of times, maybe 1,000 times, depending upon what the structure is built out of. That information is going to lead, and then a certain amount of that energy is going to be stored and released later. Dielectrics do the same thing in cables, right? So we look at the phase angles, and then we calculate loss tangents from that. So rooms are not a lot different than than cables to that degree. So what I'm trying to do here is clear up misconceptions in cables, clear up misconceptions in recording, to help lead you people in the right direction. Okay, I'm not going to tell you that every recording the Cookie's made is for you, every cable I've made is for you. No, I'm not going to say that. But for the most part, I think you have high quality products here that do what they're supposed to.
I did think of something.
You did finally?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
I finally had a thought. Actually, I wanted to pick up something that Cookie alluded to and extended a little bit. She said she's not too interested in DSD recordings that were sourced as PCM recordings. I personally don't think DSD recordings translate very well into PCM, and I don't think PCM recordings translate very well into DSD. Analog translates into both of them fairly well, luckily, but it seems pointless to me to make a PCM recording and release it as a DSD file, equally pointless to record a DSD file and release it as a PCM file, or to move it from one format to another as a intermediate before you make an analog LP. Not that it doesn't happen, and I have clients asking me to do it all the time, and I do cut LPs from various digital files, but it just seems pointless to me. But it reminds me, what are we even here talking about this for? I've been an audiophile for a long time, and as I got my system better and better, partly it was making it do more, and partly it was making it do less, getting rid of electrical distortions, box resonances in the speakers, many things, mechanical noises and stuff. And the better it got, the more I realized how limiting the source material was.
That's the point.
Now, unfortunately, my brethren and I in the mastering trade spend most of our time taking mediocre recordings and making them sound worse. That's why I don't really do very much mainstream work any longer. I much prefer to work for audiophile labels, which I do. I still do LP cutting, for instance, for reference recordings and for mobile Fidelity. And of course, I co-founded an audiophile label of my own, the Tape Project. And it's much more satisfying to make a recording, to work on a recording, to help a recording get from there to you, if that recording is capable of, making the walls of your room disappear and making your speakers disappear and taking you on a musical journey. And not all of the mainstream record business even understands this or feels the same way. And there's been several trends in an opposite direction. So, like Bruce, I'm just here to plug the people, all the people that are trying to do good work.
Yeah, every single do you have anything more to say? Are we on here? No.
I totally agree with you, Paul.
Go ahead, Cookie.
Yeah, that's really true. To me, ultimately, it's about the music. If it's on a cassette or if it's, I just grabbed it, one recording. If it's spectacular, I'll take it any way I can get it. I used to sneak my little cassette player into concerts, and probably half of you were guilty of the same, and bring it home, and I still have a lot of those recordings. And I'll listen to them because there was some kind of magic going on. And really, that's what I'm ultimately looking for, is the magic. I think that's what Paul's describing. And I think one of the things that took us out of professional audio, well, not completely. We're still in it. We're still answering to our clients who want us to make loud CDs, working on PCM that was badly recorded and badly edited. And I had a client threaten to leave because I wouldn't use auto-tune. What Paul and I did was start our own labels and record things that made us happy. And I'm much happier now when I choose the artist and the performance and how it's recorded. And in my situation, I sometimes offer the artist in exchange, okay, I'll make your record if you make mine, and we can make the same record, and they'll want to do all this crazy stuff to it, and I'll just say, sure, we'll spend like 20 hours and $5,000 taking out every tiny little lip smack possible. And then they have no budget. And I'm trying to understand why. Artists have they're their own worst enemy, honestly. They're trying to deliver to you perfection, which doesn't exist in real life. And it's kind of sad. And like Paul said, we all choose our formats. For me, it's DSD and analog. For others, it's PCM. But ultimately, I think we're all just looking for great music.
Okay, before we go on blabbing anymore, do we have any questions? And please don't be bashful. Yes, sir.
I mean, you asked the question, kind of why are we all here? And one thing that occurs to me is we have kind of this kind of watershed change that we have available to us now with the higher res possibilities anyway. And so, Ms. Marenco, what you were talking about in terms of, okay, we have it available to us, if we have the source available to us, if we can find that source, is there any way to, I guess I'm trying to figure out how y'all can establish protocols across the industry so that you can help sort, kind of understand the sourcing and then communicate that source out, because the artists that y'all find today, well, we have libraries of artists that go back many, many years, you can't refer them, they're dead or whatever, that we still want to bring into this new paradigm. And because of that, it's a matter of kind of going on that Easter egg hunt. How do we find them? And it would seem to me that it's up to people like you who have touch points into the right places, but without the protocols, the common kind of understandings across the different participants in the industry, it'll never happen. And you've got us as a niche group versus the mass, where they'll never be interested in it, they'll never understand it. How do you get the commitment? How do you raise that level up to the point where the folks who are really making their money with the masses will cooperate so that you can get the sources you need, so that we can enjoy it?
It's a very, very good question. And I think we're all here tackling that same issue. And what I've seen in terms of the food chain is I've tried to convince the artists about higher quality, and it doesn't work. Even worse, trying to commit that there's actually a future in high-resolution recording are professional audio engineers. One of the most depressing conferences you can go to is the Audio Engineering Society. The AES show, I can't even get into it, but there's a lot of very depressed engineers who are my cohorts for the last 25 years. Most of them because of the economy, because they all made a certain kind of conversion, all started working out of their bedrooms to save a little extra money, and it was just a downhill cycle from the 80s until it finally crashed, because now artists are recording at home. They can record just as badly as most of these engineers. And they care a little bit more. They actually may even get better recordings. I started out as a musician, and I'm not that technical. I'm much more on the music side of things. So the future that I see is actually when we started selling DSD, I just stopped talking to the artist and started talking to you. And then I went to the artists, and they would say to me, wow, you mean they're buying this? Yeah, they're buying this. The artists are starting to come to me now and say, let's record the way you record. Okay. It saves them a lot of money, that's for sure. We're not in there for 2 months. And then what I'm going to predict is that the professional audio engineers will be dragged along by the artists who are demanding higher quality. When they see that there's a market for it, and it's not going to happen tomorrow or even in a year, this is a 5 to 10 year project that we're on. And a commitment that I've made is doing panels like this, but more so going to the schools. I'm on a few university boards advising the audio schools. Most of the audio engineers, except for Paul and me, got jobs in the education, in at universities. So they'll occasionally call us up, and we'll go and talk there. And I'll talk to them. Last year I talked to 250 educators, audio educators from around the world who came, and all I had to say was, we're getting $5 a single. And they, what? And I said, well, have you ever heard of DSD? No, what is it? And these are professional audio engineers who are now teaching. If you want to know the truth, most audio schools don't even have the facility to allow a student to mic a set of drums. They're reading out of a book how to mic a set of drums. It's going to crash and burn. So what we're looking at is an entire ecosystem change. And I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see a division between electronic music, what I call electronic, the looping, the sampling, doing everything at home. Hey, that's great. Let's all go dance. And what I call acoustic music, which is performance-based by real musicians. And that could be rock music, that could be jazz, that could be orchestral, but it'll be performance-based music. And that has actually an opportunity to cut through. And I think in 10 years, we may be able to capture 15% of the market. And if you look, even with MP3, which has been around since 1997, and we're now 15 years into it, they still only have 30% of the market share worldwide in sales. So, you know, we're being led to believe that MP3's taken over everything, but it hasn't. Still, most of the world is buying CDs. And I think that there's an opportunity for higher resolution to exist.
Yeah, I just want to talk around your question slightly. I started mastering in the LP era, and LP was the only release format. And the idea was everyone made a recording as good as they possibly could, generally on tape, and it got transferred to an LP, and the guy doing the transfer tried to make it sound as good as he possibly could. And then the consumer decided how much quality they were willing to pay for in the playback end. And then things started to change with the introduction of the next format, which was cassette. And cassette pretty soon, well, in less than 10 years, was outselling LP. It didn't sound as good, but it had convenience factor. And it was a little depressing to those of us who were more quality-oriented, but that's what happened. And then the next format that came and took the lead away from cassette was the CD. And in my opinion, CD sounded better than cassette, not maybe better than the best cassette made on a Nakamichi and played on a Nakamichi, but certainly better than those mass-produced high-speed cassettes that the major labels were pumping out in penny-and-a-half shells. And people chose to move from cassette to CD, and it proved to me that if you give them just as much convenience, they don't object to higher quality. So that was a little bit hopeful for me. Well, the next thing, now we have a convenience format, convenient because you can email a song to your buddy. That's why MP3 got established. And it's clearly inferior. That's not a bad thing. I'm still okay with the consumer deciding what level of quality they're willing to pay for. The unfortunate part is, as it started to become a big part of people's output, many people started recording for the MP3, listening to the MP3 and sort of gearing their recording towards it. Even worse, some people were doing their original recording on MP3, emailing it around so someone could add some parts, and then re-encode to MP3 and email it on to the next guy that adds some more parts. And if you think an MP3 sounds bad, you can't imagine how bad it sounds when it's been re-encoded 4 or 5 times. So anyway, just a little historical perspective on why we're in a kind of a funny point in history. But the good part of it, or the hopeful part of it at least, is through all of this, the audiophile labels only had the same formats to deal with that the majors were. And after DVD audio, where a lot of, and SACD, which are, neither one is a success in the marketplace. DVD audio is an abject failure, and SACD is only a niche success. But after that, it seems we don't have to tie ourselves to the formats that the majors are using. And I'm seeing, Cookie's probably the best example, but there's others as well of people just saying, well, I can make a better sounding recording. Let's see if people will buy it. So that's my hopeful note at the end of this historical diatribe.
We have a question. Go ahead.
Like some of your panelists, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I have a friend there who's a recording engineer and an equipment designer. He says he's on a professional-only internet forum with professionals, and they think we've gotten carried away with the numbers in high res. He says the consensus on that forum is that all you need is about 77K.
You want my opinion on that? You
Well,
sure?
I like cookies especially.
Well, I'm more than happy to give you my opinion on that.
You know what I've chosen to do?
Hey, I didn't ask you.
Oh. I think I know that forum. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, no, let me yeah. Yeah, you really settled on a nerve there, buddy. Okay, I'm going to try and make this short. It's very complex, but I'm going to try and keep it short, which I have difficulty with, which is why I bring these people with me. And if my mic doesn't go dead again, I think I got the battery dying. At 44K, you're only sampling 20 kilohertz, which is the high end of what we perceive as the high end of audibility range 2 times. If I'm going to draw a sine wave, I got a beginning, an amplitude, go back to 0 phase, a negative, and the 5th point gets me to the first and the next. What's going to what's going to be correct? Maybe the amplitude at 20 kilohertz, or maybe the phase, not both. That's the first thing I'm going to have you ponder. The second thing, and I'm going to jump way ahead here to 2 years ago, when I was informed by very good sources that the ear can hear interchannel delays, left to right delays, on the order of 350 kilohertz. Now I'm going to go way back. That's about 2.8 microseconds. That's really a short periodicity. Okay. Now I'm going to go way back to the 80s when digital came out, and I said, "What's wrong with this stuff?" The original recordings, which were pretty insufficient. So I hired a digital expert as a consultant, and together we worked up a model that showed that if we were to take a long stream of audio, and a record was a long stream of audio, right? How many feet in a record? I was told that, huh?
Quarter of a mile.
Quarter, some huge number, okay, that it would not sample every harmonic required periodically. It was going to have dropouts. That was the first thing that led me to this 350 kilohertz number. So I had been carrying this 350 kilohertz number in my head for over 20 years. Now I'm told that there's interchannel delays that we can hear by audiologists. This has come from scientists and audiologists, that we can hear these left to right delays, okay? So now I have a correlation. As a scientist, you perceive things and then you try and answer the questions, okay? So I went to work on this. I went to work on this about 2 years ago. And I built 5 prototype cables that were special cables to where on an interconnect we were able to drop the analog jitter down, interchannel delay jitter, down to 10 hertz. The first thing you think when you do these things is, well, it's going to help dimension. We had no way of knowing how much it helped tonality. And I can't pass that on to you. You can't pass on to me something that you hear that's great, and I can't pass it on to you because the words don't do justification, because of the emotional connection that these gentlemen just talked about earlier, okay? So no, it's 44K is very Thank you. We okay here? Yeah. So now after 2 years, I've done 5 prototypes. We just put this product on the market, and as Kent Laughlin, my vice president of sales, will tell you back there, he's not to sell it to everybody yet. It has to go out, be beta tested at a certain amount of dealers, a certain amount of distributors, because we've now dropped, and if I tell you the number, you won't believe me, where the jitter started on cable, okay? It was 800 hertz on the interconnects. Speaker cables we'd been controlling down to a fractional hertz, something below 1, but not DC, for quite some time now. You put these two things together, and what I call it is a visceral effect. What's missing in recorded music is that live feeling that you feel. I call it visceral. You call it what? Tactile. And you call it what? Aesthetics. Okay, we went through this last night at dinner, which my friend graciously purchased. I didn't want him to, but he did. All right, so the disconnect of the emotion, the visceral from the music, is what we're missing. And I'll tell you exactly where you're missing it. Okay, it's not in loudness. You don't really need, Paul and I have discussed this, you don't need 24 dB of vertical resolution. Excuse me, 24-bit, 130 dB, 6 dB per decibel. You don't need it. Tape was fine at about 80, roughly speaking. Okay, I told you, you opened up a can of worms here, didn't you? You don't need it. You can get along with 80, 90 dB, 100 dB. Okay, no problem. You got sufficient dynamics in there. Okay. What we're all searching for is the tonality that's I call visceral. He calls tactile. It's a connection. That's what we get when we go to live music. It's a connection. The people around you, the emotionalism. Okay, when you get all the harmonics in the music proper, out to the 7th harmonic, and you go in between the octaves and you optimize all of the intervals. The harmonics are even numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, we go to the 7th. The intervals are found by dividing those whole numbers. 1 divided by 2, 2 divided by 3, 3 divided by 4, okay? Consonance and dissonance, we talked about this earlier. Perfect unisons, perfect sine waves, where they come up at 50%, 50%, 50%, 50%. And those intervals are so damn important, I can't tell you. I can't describe it to you. When you get those intervals in there, and you get them optimized, you get as close to the music as you're going to get. We had a recording engineer come into MIT and listen to a record with us 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to mention his name. And he said, holy mackerel, how are you doing this? And he broke out in tears. This is a recording engineer, okay, that did this. It's that what I call that visceral component. I'm going to continue to call it visceral. Lowell's going to bitch at me later on. Are there any more questions? We're not getting booted out of here yet, so.
Oh, can I answer that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Cookie.
I take a whole different approach.
Comment or two.
Those engineers on that forum, how many of them have jobs? Because most of them, when I go on there, are screaming that I don't have a client base anymore. And what happened was, having a studio, actually I have the oldest commercial recording facility in the Bay Area, within 100 miles now, owner founded and operated. Everybody left the business to become educators or something else. So what's happened is, when the move went to Pro Tools. Everybody said, Cookie, how are you staying in business when you stay on tape? I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you know, we've increased our our days. Every project takes 3 times longer because we just let the artist go in there and fix everything. And I'm thinking, I can't work like that. That I would rather have a good performance. I work towards a good performance and artists, you know, excelling in the performance. And they said, wow, we don't know how you're going to do it. Well, guess who's still in business? Everyone else who gave into the Pro Tools and gave into the auto-tune, gave into all those little effects and buses and compromised the quality of the sound, the dark ages of the 90s, they just gave up. Those are the engineers that don't have jobs anymore because the artists found out they could just as easily put those plugins and work at home and get the same bad sound that they got from those recording engineers. So what I tend to do is when those forums come up, and a lot of them I've tried to respond, I just stop. It's not even worth talking to them. Those folks are they're just running themselves out of business. So, and really, most of my best friends for 25 years were professional audio engineers or manufacturers. I entered the audiophile community in 2007, and it was like finding a home base. Here are people who love music, and they love sound. I'm not really sure how it happened to me. I didn't even know I was an audiophile, but when you have to sit in front of a pair of speakers all day long for hours and hours, 12, 16 hours at a time, every day, you're working on Christmas, that's what's expected, you just don't want to listen to bad sound. It just, for me, I can't listen repeatedly to, and you know what, and when you put MP3 on, you can go for a while and then you go, oh, it's okay. It's like wallpaper. But even going to a movie, now I can't even go to a movie anymore. I can barely go to a live concert that's coming out of a PA that's got so much compression, they've taken out all the life and dynamics. I think there's actually a huge future in people staying home and listening to a great sounding stereo because it sounds better than a live concert.
Yeah, I agree very much with everything Cookie said, but I want to talk about a little different side of it. I don't spend much time on those forums either. It's disheartening. Most of the people arguing that lower sample rates are adequate are arguing from theoretical, not from listening. You will very rarely find someone said, I did weeks of careful listening and I just didn't hear a difference. Mostly it's from the theoretical. And digital audio, you must understand, is very well described in theory. And there's math that proves it, and the proofs are elegant, and the precision is very seductive. And for the most part, all the proofs are true as far as they go. So when a guy tells you the Nyquist theorem says you can do this, in fact it does. But again and again and again, I see people arguing as if the theory also is the same as what happens when you try and apply that theory in a practical piece of equipment. And it's not at all. The Nyquist theorem doesn't say anything about what happens when you run the audio through the 2 filters that you have to use, one going in and one going out. And the people that I know that are trying to make digital equipment sound better and that are serious listeners have always found that those ringing filters and the dispersion and other anomalies that this creates and the waveform distortion that it creates is objectionable to their ears, and they've looked for all kinds of ways to get around those problems. And the reason that they wind up going to higher sample rates is because it helps them solve those problems, which the Nyquist theory simply ignores. So,
The higher res, the closer you get to the analog smoothness.
Yeah, I'm going to actually quote Paul from if it's okay with Paul, from another seminar where he said the best benefit you'll realize it's going to 8824. Okay? If there's no other questions, I think we're going to call it an evening because I know we have somebody else coming in here after us. I don't want to hold them up. And we'd like to thank you all, but before you go, read this. And there's going to be, thank you.